Welcome. Today we're going to be discussing the technique Crossing Talon and how to relate it to other elements of the American Kenpo system. So keep in mind that this is not a comprehensive list and it is not family groupings. The better way to think about it is just different avenues that we're going to explore so that you can uncover how the system is formulated. So let's start out with our base technique, Crossing Talon, and one of the important concepts that are inside of it. It's called head and neck manipulation. In this case, what we're going to be doing is locking it up. So let's talk through that for a second. We get to here in this piece, and what we do is we do this hit, and then what we want to do is lock up the neck. The important things here that we need to discuss are the facts that we're keeping him on the horizontal, but we're moving the head onto a vertical, but we're doing it from side to side. Okay? So let's do an opposite of this. Rather than keeping them on the horizontal, let's keep them on the vertical. That would bring in something like a grip of death, where we now try and get the opponent vertical. We do the exact same thing with the elbow, basically the same thing that we were doing previously, but now we're doing it to get it into a vertical. The other opposite thing that we want to talk about here is the fact that the head is no longer going side to side, it's going front to back. Another way to think about this is that we can now start from a vertical position and keep them in a vertical position. This would bring in something like a striking serpent's head. So notice now the body is going up and down rather than turning up and down. So therefore our pressure has to go down. And again, just like we did with the previous technique, the head is now front to back. We can do this exact same thing with something like a circling the storm, where we're now doing it from behind the opponent when we get to this piece. But if you'll notice what's happening here, even though the head is staying vertical, the important part here is that we're actually applying the pressure from the front, even though that we're on the side. So now these all have been going front to back, but we can go back to what we were doing in Crossing Talon and go to side. That would bring in something like circling destruction, where we're now using the left hand. We can then do the opposite of that and do the right hand, and that brings us in something like a glancing lance, where we now lock them up, and we do that to free up the left hand. We can then do something like an escape from darkness, where we do the opposite side, where we actually hit with the left hand across the body, lock them up, therefore we free up our right hand. So up to now we've been talking about locking. We can now use the exact same thing for manipulation. So if we take it into something like fatal cross, where we get into this piece here, we can then manipulate the head to have the entire body move. In other words, the way to think about this is wherever the head goes, the body follows. So in this case, what we're doing is we're spinning them so that they're back down or face up. We can then do the opposite of that. That would bring in something like a dominating circles, where they're now going from a face up to a face down position. So right now for these last two, we were doing an entire manipulation of the head and body. We don't have to do that. We can do a piece of that or a smaller version of that, where we're just trying to expose targets on the face. So for instance, that's bringing something like an intercepting the ram. If you notice, we're taking the left hand and exposing the face targets and then hitting on a horizontal. We can then do that exact same thing, but do it on a vertical. That brings in something like a glancing wing, where at this piece, we're now hitting vertically onto the face to expose those targets through the manipulation. So up to now, we've been just doing the manipulations and the locking. Well, we can then do an explicit breaking. This would bring in something like a backbreaker. We're actually getting to this piece here, face up like we did previous techniques, but now instead of applying a small amount of pressure, we're applying a lot of pressure in order to get the break rather than a lock. Therefore, we also have a downward facing of that, which would bring in something like a leap of death. We're doing the exact same thing, but the opponent is now on a horizontal rather than a vertical. So therefore, we work on a vertical rather than a horizontal. Up. So in review, how do we relate Crossing Talon? Was through head and neck manipulations. Hope this video helps you understand the American Kenpo system just a little bit better. Thank you very much.